All right, Diana, welcome. Thank you. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well. So we're gonna have a whole bunch of people sort of add in over, probably the next few minutes. And so basically what we do is we just kind of chat and, get going. And then a lot of the folks might just have questions for you. And then I'll relay their questions to you. So it's not just a bunch of, a cacophony of people talking at the same time. We have to manage this because we often get pretty big numbers in here, sometimes, close to 100 people. So thank you so much for coming on. I know we have a lot of people, we have different topics, and a lot of people in here are interested in regenerative style agriculture. And, I know you've got a background as a registered dietitian, and so we've got a lot of potential areas of conversation, I think. So, how are things? Let me ask you, how are things in out in the Northeast? I know you're up there in New Hampshire, and where are you at? I can't remember exactly.
I'm close to New Hampshire. I'm in west of Boston, but we do a lot of stuff in New Hampshire. We're really close to the border there. School is closed until May 4th, so I'm over here in my office up the street, and because my kids would be shouting funny words from the other side of the room if I was home. I'm feeling really happy to be living on a farm right now. We've got lots of baby lambs. We've just got a whole bunch of pigs. We've got a lot of root crops from the winter, and we're pretty well provisioned. We've got lots of things for the kids to do, and it's actually not that different from my normal lifestyle. I'm just working out at home instead of going to a gym, but otherwise it's like pretty similar to how I normally live.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know that you've got that sort of set up, and some people have some. We've got some ranchers and farmers in here that have a similar lifestyle. I know Scott's up in Manitoba with his, I don't know how many head of cattle he has, so it's kind of interesting to see how when things hit the fan, how important our food system really truly is, and people start to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's hopefully a wake up call for a lot of people for this sort of stuff. So.
Mhm.
You tell, just because some people may not, obviously I've known you for a couple of years now, but the people that don't know who you are, can you give us a quick background? I do want to talk about your film quite a bit because I think that's super
Yeah.
exciting. Uh, let's let people know who you are a little bit.
Sure. So I have lived on working farms for the last 18 years. And even before that, my high school and college job in the summer was working on farms. I've always loved being outside and growing food. Let's see, I was diagnosed with celiac disease in my mid-20s, and that answered a lot of questions. I'm pretty sure I had celiac my entire life. I was really underweight and low muscle tone, some reading problems and stuff in school growing up. And going gluten-free really solved a lot of my digestive stuff, but my metabolic blood sugar roller coaster was still a huge mess. And I kept going to the doctor and, demanding a diabetes test constantly because I knew something was wrong. I would pass out actually a lot. And it wasn't until I read the paleo solution basically. And I don't like sweet potatoes. So I basically did like a keto diet because I was like, I'll do that, except for I'm going to up the fat a little bit because I sort of read some Weston A. Price stuff. And I'm going to just not eat those carby things because I don't really like, sweet potatoes. And it fixed me. Like I couldn't believe I went from breakfast to lunch without needing a snack. I could eat a late lunch and feel fine. And it just really changed my life. And so I decided to make that my career. And I went back to school. I became a registered dietitian so that I could take insurance and be a little more legit, work with some GI doctors, which I have a really good relationship now. They send me all their people that they can't fix, that they can't diagnose. And I do sort of real food nutrition. I'm very protein forward. Personally, I eat almost carnivore. I probably eat vegetables like once or twice a day, and they're usually cooked. And I just feel so much better that way. I've noticed all my clients feel better that way. And, so I definitely support Carnivore. I think it's a great intervention for a lot of people. And so I've got this book and film coming out. I just finished writing a book with Rob Wolf. Actually, we were debating with our publisher, who happens to be the publisher of the China study, by the way. They're a vegan publisher. We were debating, do we release it in July? Do we move it out? Like, what's going to go on? Is this a bad time to release a book? And, we decided to go ahead and just keep moving forward with the book release. So that's July 14th. And then the film version of it, I'm in post-production now. Actually, I should have a rough cut this week, and talking to animators. It's all coming along really well. The film is more focused on the environmental case for better meat, but we do make a really strong case that meat has something that humans have always eaten, that animal products contain nutrients that you can't get other places. Where the book is equally addressing nutrition, environment, and ethics. The film is largely focused on the environment. And so we're talking to distributors now, and we expect the film to come out a little after the book, probably like early fall.
Very nice. Yeah.
And it's called Sacred Cow.
And I've seen some of the previews. It looks like a wonderful film. I don't know if hopefully maybe some of the people have seen it in here, but you've been working on it for, I think, 2 years now or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
The film has been 3 years. The book has really been like 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a long time.
Yeah.
You change when you went in with your sort of thought as to what was going to happen at the beginning when you went into making the film. Did it change significantly, as you learn stuff towards the end?
Yeah, totally. Initially, I just started shooting, and we thought that the film would be, like a triptych, like nutrition, environment, and ethics. But we started filming the nutrition piece because we wanted to really follow cases over time. And it was turning into basically a keto film. We were following Dr. Hallberg, and great stories, really compelling, but it was taking over the whole narrative. It's so complex. I mean, just to do, there's already been films like that out, but I mean, just to explain how did we get to where we are with our nutrition issues and all of that was really its own film. So then we decided, well, we were debating, should we do this as a docu-series where we have each episode, addressing nutrition, environment, ethics, how do we feed the future, basically more laid out like the book. And we were kind of going back and forth because my main goal is really to have this as a counterpoint to Cowspiracy and What the Health. And we were kind of feeling like, would a docuseries really do that? Like if we had to have someone watch 10 episodes compared to like a one punch, like Cowspiracy, would a docuseries really do that? And do we have the money to do a really good docuseries? Because there's also, how much money you put into it really does impact how nice it is and how well it gets reviewed and who carries it. And so we decided with the money we had, the biggest issue is really the environmental case against meat right now. The nutrition's pretty easy to argue, I think. Meat is pretty straightforward, and there's really not a huge difference between, grass-fed and typical beef as far as nutrition. And so it was really the environmental case that we decided to focus on for the film. So yeah, it morphed a lot. The fundraising has been, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It's just been it's very intense. So anyway, we're feeling like it's a really solid film right now, really entertaining, and hopefully will be that counterpoint that gets shown in every school that's shown Cowspiracy.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to be honest, I didn't watch Cowspiracy. I wasn't really compelled to do it. I mean, I watched some of these other vegan films, and they're all kind of the same thing. But I mean, why do you think they get it so wrong? I mean, what data are they looking at that that maybe they're missing the point? I mean, where are we getting such a big dichotomy in what one person says versus another people says? Shouldn't there be a single set of data we can utilize that people can say this is what's going on, or are they what's going on with that?
So just like with the nutrition stuff, they're sort of looking at observational studies and, trying to prove something where you can't even prove anything, right? Observation can just show associations and really just show the author's bias. It's kind of the same thing with all the environmental cases against meat too. So we've got, water studies. It takes 10 bathtubs full of water to make a hamburger. Well, is that rainwater or is that the water, is that irrigation water? Greenhouse gases, it's kind of each one of those takes a good amount of time to really break down. But when you really look at the methodology of the studies that they're using to vilify cattle, they just don't hold any weight.
Yeah, and it seems like, once the data or once a narrative is out there in the public perception, even if it's wrong, it takes a tremendous amount of work to sort of undo that. It's kind of like unbrainwashing people. Some people say it takes 10 times the work to undo, BS, basically.
Totally. And it when people are so disconnected from nature and how food is produced, it does, death feels scary. I mean, like most people don't have a will, right? Like everyone's very afraid of death. I mean, even this corona, a lot of people are dying that it's not like they were never going to die. They're going to die. It's just they're going to die sooner with corona. But it's the same thing with eating animals. Everything has to die in order for new things to come in. And we have no we have no interface at all with death with humans. Those of us who've worked in hospitals do, but most people don't. And we also just have no connection to how things die in the real world either. And so I think it all comes down to our fear of death, which is a big part of all this.
Yeah, and one of the things we often hear from sort of the plant-based, the vegan camp, is they're guilt-free. They have all this food at which they no animals die or suffer for their food. Is there any truth to that?
Was that a rhetorical question?
Yeah, kind of. But I mean, yeah, but for some people that don't sort of, I mean, because most people have never been to a farm or a ranch or anything. I mean, and I'm not a rancher, but I've at least gone and been on them and talked to them and interact with ranchers and seen what's going on. And most of these are so removed from that. So I mean, what's on that?
I mean, even so, we're primarily an organic vegetable farm, actually, where I live, and tons of stuff dies. I mean, my son sits out there with a gun, a little shotgun, shooting birds that are trying to eat our blueberries, bunnies that are trying to eat the lettuce. There's snakes that are coming out of the lettuce sometimes. We've got fencing up because we've got huge deer pressure. There's coyotes all over the place. I mean, there's a lot of death that happens on organic farms, and that's not even, talking about when things aren't grown organically and there's all this pesticides and herbicides, and we've got an insect apocalypse happening right now. We've got no pollinators left. I mean, all these things are massive, and so there is no death situation. So the only option that we have is better death, right? And taking responsibility for that death.
What, so I guess you said you're in post-production. I mean, my understanding is post-production. I was just in a film meeting yesterday with another filmmaker. Chris Bellett's going to be making a movie. And talking to the producers, it seems like the post-production is the longest part of the movie. I mean, it's like the filming can be very quick, but it can take you months and months and months of editing. Is that what you're finding as well?
Not in my case. We're kind of speeding through it pretty quickly. So I went out, I interviewed about 30 people and visited probably 8 or 10 locations for film stories, butchers and ranchers and things like that. And then the editors, so I've got a writer and an editor, and this writer that I hired is so super sharp. So she basically in 1 month without having any knowledge of any of this background. That, I mean, she kind of knew that there was stuff in the media about like people should not eat meat and that it's bad for the planet, but that's about it. And in 1 month, she caught up to speed completely and had a whole story arc, was familiar with every expert I interviewed, knew, could recall sound bites. I mean, so I think it's just finding that really sharp editor that can really wrap their head around the story and write it out in a really great way. And so she started in January, and we've already got a rough cut. Like, we've already basically have the film done. And so once that rough cut is done, then I've got a composer putting music together. I've got animators taking a lot of those graphics that I've done and basically just those yellow graphics that I have on my Instagram, and basically just making the cows move and, you know, making those things come to life. So I think in a lot of cases, post-production does take the longest amount of time, but I knew exactly how I wanted it to flow. And my writer was just, again, just so smart. So we're lucky in the Boston area. We've got Frontline, and WGBH puts out a lot of documentaries. And so we've got some really smart people around here.
Who were some of the experts you interviewed? There's a few people I recognized, but a few people I didn't. So, I mean, who are some of the folks that are in there that might be of interest?
So on the nutrition end, we've got Rob Wolf, who's the executive producer, Chris Kresser. We interviewed Chris Masterjohn. Zoe Harcum, her interview was like, the whole thing happened in like 20 minutes, and it was just like soundbite after soundbite. She was so sharp. Nina Teicholz talking about dietary guidelines. Trying to think of other nutrition experts. Mark Hyman was really great. We went out to his home in Western Mass. And then on the ethics end, we have Leah Keith talking about her story about, you know, how veganism destroyed her. But it's really great because she also understands the environmental impact as well. We have Jason Roundtree. We went to his ranch, his like test lab in Michigan, where he measures methane output out of cattle and different forages, and like what, you know, like chicory, for example, you know, they're studying, does chicory cause less methane than other types of forage? And we also have a great example of how rainfall, you know, what it does to cropping versus pastures. Let's see, Frank Mittloner, I know you know him, really, really great. We've got a few people from the United Nations, which is really good. And then as far as ranchers go, we visited Polyface Farm in Virginia. We visited a massive cattle ranch in Chihuahua, Mexico, where we had like a run-in with the police and our stuff was held back, and it was a really wild shoot. We went out to Belgium and shot with a butcher out there. We shot with some butchers in California that had vegan protesters try to shut them down. So it's kind of a mix of like talking heads, but then we also have stories mixed in there too to keep it entertaining.
Yeah, it sounds really, really nice. Do you have a distribution thing set up yet? Is it going to be on network and Netflix or wherever, or is it sort of still in the negotiation stuff?
It's still in negotiations. I have physically met. I flew out to Netflix and had coffee with them and explained, and they seemed really interested. And at first they were just sort of interested in the idea that it was a counterpoint, but then as I explained the project more, they were even more excited about it. So I'm not sure if it'll be a Netflix original or just distributed on Netflix, but I'm hoping for Netflix because they sort of have the corner on the market. But if that doesn't come through, there's lots of other options. And, you know, I'm also, you know, it wouldn't be that bad if I just initially streamed it on my website and got all those viewers myself. So I'm really open right now, but I'm also really interested in the education market because, like I said, you know, my main goal is to really reach young people and try to get this into all the schools where What the Health and Cowspiracy are being shown, because that's who I'm seeing in my clinic right here. Like I'm seeing mostly teenage girls who are wrecked from a vegan diet, and there's all this virtue signaling going on, and it's, you know, it's just really bad. So just as many eyeballs as I can get is my number one goal.
Yeah, and I guess maybe some people don't realize how hard this is being pushed on our youth. You know, it's we see that, you know, in the school curriculums. It's like, you know, the best thing you can do for the environment is cut back on meat, and that is actually, you know, I'm shocked that it's in the school, you know, in the school curriculums without really being looked at as being accurate, which is a shame. And I think you are seeing the early results of that with these kids that are having, um, you know, health problems, mental health problems, eating disorders, trying to eat this vegan diet, which in most cases, you know, unless it's very extremely well planned, turns out to be a malnourishing diet and even for people that plan well, they end up with problems with that. So, are you?
Yeah.
And so you say you're seeing all these kids that are wrecked from veganism. How is that? How is that coming about? I mean, are you able to fix them, or are they? So are you finding it's hard to get them to sort of brainwash the ethical beliefs they have?
You know, it's hard because the only population that I don't really work with is eating disorders, because I just feel like I'm not a social worker, and that's really much more of a mental health issue than a food related issue. And what I'm noticing with a lot of young vegans is that this is more of an eating disorder than you know, just telling them to eat meat. They've got real mental baggage around meat that's really, really deep for them. So I try, but you know, sometimes I also work with counselors to try to, you know, like I'll sort of push them out on more therapists to try to help unravel that. And I'm hoping that the film will help folks. I'm also working on a course to help people with, you know, relearning how to eat meat again, and you know, hoping that that'll help out. But yeah, it's definitely crossing the line more into an eating disorder territory than just a straight up, you know, like if someone has IBS and I tell them what to eat, they'll do it. Or if they want to get pregnant, and I tell them to eat a bunch of fat and protein, no problem. But you know, changing the wiring in someone's brain from having been vegan to eating meat again is, even when they know, even when they're super sick, it can be really hard.
Yeah, that's so now I assume are you as a practicing registered dietitian, are you getting any sort of pushback from the RD, you know, governing bodies about, you know, the fact that you're recommending diets that may not fall in line with the standard teaching, or when you went through, did you find that the training to be very much different from what you believe right now?
Well, I went into the RD program having gone through Nutritional Therapy Association. So I did that first, which is sort of a Weston A. Price nutritional therapy program. And that really kind of, you know, before I did that program, I was feeling a little confused. I'd read a book on juicing and that sounded right. And you know, these writers are really compelling. And so I was feeling really confused. But when I left Nutritional Therapy Association and had read the Paleo Solution and started going to a few paleo type conferences, I really felt like I had a really good handle on what was true. And then I also had some good mentors like Matt Lalonde here at Harvard. I could text him right from my class, "Hey, my professor said this," and he would tell me why that was wrong. So it was really great to have some people to just double check with. It was really hard for me to go through the RD program on a few levels. Like one, as a mom and an older student, having to do like group projects on campus, which was an hour away from my house, you know, like doing a group poster with a bunch of undergrads was not fun. The classes were really expensive at Simmons. They were, you know, one of my classes was like almost $8,000, medical nutrition therapy. And we had one lecture on GI that was like celiac, like all the GI symptoms or diseases in just one lecture. So it kind of sucked going through it, but we also had a couple good classes. I got some experience working in hospitals, which I wouldn't have done if I didn't have that, you know, go through the RD program. And I don't really get pushback. I'm kind of rogue and like on my own. And we'll see if I still have my license after the book and film are released, because I'm really critical against the ADA, against the idea of everything in moderation, very, very against Meatless Mondays in schools. And, you know, we'll see if I get pushback for that.
Yeah, and here's just a question from Terry, who I guess he's a carnivore chef. He's asking about what your thoughts are on the I guess the prevalence of gluten intolerance for people. Is it higher than we think it is? Is it something that you generally recommend avoiding for general people, or is it just a small subset of the population?
I think it's much more popular than we know. I think glyphosate probably has a lot to do with that as well. I do recommend to anyone who's got GI issues that walks into my office to go off gluten. But then if someone's looking to lose weight, I recommend going off gluten. I mean, there's probably no one that's walked in here that I haven't suggested going off gluten for. My kids eat gluten, and my husband eats some gluten, although he feels better when he doesn't. But my kids eat it and they seem to be okay. And I try not to be super intense with them. I already am pretty intense at home with the way I cook, and it's very different from their other friends. But if they want to go out and, you know, get a slice of pizza or whatever, they seem okay. I watch them closely. So, you know, I do think there are some people that seem to be okay when most of their diet is real food. But I think there's a way more broken people out there from gluten than we know.
Yeah, and you said, but you put in glyphosate,
Glyphosate.
rather in there, and you know, do you think that? I mean, obviously they're using it kind of generically over a lot of different crops. Why do you think it's more glyphosate than the gluten itself?
So glyphosate's been like proven safe for humans, but not for our biome, and it really wrecks our biome. And I think it can set somebody up for, if you have constant exposure to glyphosate, it can actually, you know, maybe help turn on those epigenetic switches to celiac and other GI issues if you're already prone to something like that. So I just think it's you know, the way we're using it is just not, you know, we've never seen the prevalence of GI issues that like we do now ever before in our past. And it's not just the wheat, and it's not just the testing. I think it's more than that.
What so because there's people that talk about glyphosate, does it accumulate in meat? I mean, my thought, well, I thought I understood that it probably maybe doesn't, but I mean, what are your thoughts or knowledge about glyphosate accumulating in different types of meat, whether it's depending on how it's prepared, like if cows are eating wheat, or not wheat, but you know what I'm saying, corn, are there
Yep.
much glyphosate in their fatty tissue? Does that occur?
No, I did pretty much a systematic review on all the papers looking at E. coli, looking at, you know, other antibiotic residues on like steaks. I looked at other toxins. I looked at glyphosate, and really there just was no good evidence that your typical steak from the grocery store that was finished at a feedlot is really that much different than a steak that you would buy from a local farmer that's grass-fed. That has not given me a whole lot of friends in the grass-fed beef world, but it's just what it is. And I feel like it actually makes me more credible because I'm not using my bias to, you know, cloud my views on what the science is saying. I also think that allows, you know, somebody, you know, maybe a lower income family that's struggling to, you know, meet their rent check and everything, like just go buy some meat. You don't have to eat rice and beans instead of meat. You don't have to spend your entire paycheck on half a cow. Just go get yourself some meat, and you're going to give your kids a good advantage. And but then, you know, I do think there are good environmental and ethical reasons why you should eat grass-fed you know, meat from a regenerative farmer. You know, certainly the meat that we raise at our farm is grass-fed, organic, and all of that. So I think if people have the access to good meat, they should definitely support it. But I don't think, I mean, it's like a doctor saying you should only eat organic vegetables or don't eat vegetables, right? Like no ethical doctor would say that to a client, a patient. And I think that's the same, you know, I don't know why meat has gotten like, you have to eat a grass fed or don't eat any meat. You know, I think that's unethical. I think that meat is really nutrient dense food, and you know, there's lots of other reasons to eat, you know, better meat, but nutrition is not one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I've made that point too, and obviously I get a lot of pushback on that. You know, like when you look at the actual science and studies that have been done on, you know, health outcomes in humans comparing the two types of meat, there really isn't anything you can hang your hat on. And I do agree that the environmental ethical reasons are probably a reason to do that. Niti, who's a big proponent of regenerative, a huge proponent of regenerative things, she feels that, you know, maybe we can't accurately test glyphosate or other residues in meat. I think they can, and are able to do that just like they can test for antibiotic residues and anything else. But she feels that maybe that's not true, and has seen people with, uh, you know, better outcomes or sensitivities when they eat this meat versus that meat. And I'm sure that happens to some people, and I don't know that we necessarily know why. But
Yeah, I take the same position you do. I definitely have heard anecdotal evidence, you know, from people saying they can only eat grass fed. And we have clients that are vegetarian except for the meat that they get from our farm. I don't understand the mechanisms, and you know, from every study I've read on glyphosate residue in meat, there's just no difference. And I think that there is a bigger difference with chicken and pork, and I think it has to do with, you know, monogastrics. They're taking the food directly in, where meat, you know, what the cattle are eating almost gets like translated from their bacteria, then turned into fatty acids that the cattle are living on. So it's a different, ruminants have a different way of absorbing their nutrients than monogastric animals.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be, the cows seem to be able to absorb more. You know, like I said, for many of us that are in the sort of the carnivore space or carnivore adjacent, we worry about whatever oxalates or different toxins that that we might be exposed from plants. I mean, cows are eating that stuff all day long in the field, and they don't, it doesn't accumulate in their meat either to any significant degree. So I mean, I think, the issue with, that classic study by I'm blanking on his name right now, but the toxicology study from Bruce Ames 1990 study showing that the majority of the pesticides that humans consume are from plants themselves, not necessarily what's sprayed on them. And so we have to say, well, if we're worried about nanograms or picograms of pesticide residue when we've got thousandfold more of that in the plant themselves and what the cows eat themselves, then we have to put it in perspective. So
yeah, that the omega-3 thing too, it's, there really just isn't evidence that the difference in omega-3s is even significant in grass-fed versus typical cattle, or that it would make a difference in your overall diet anyway if you were just to switch to grass-fed beef. Because if you were to look at, the overall fatty acids in a steak, it's like this little tiny sliver is the omega-3s. And so 2 pennies is twice as much as 1 penny, but it's still not a lot of money. And that's what I like to equate that to. So I think the way to improve your omega ratio is to not eat processed foods and things that have a lot of omega-6 in them. And that's going to make a much bigger difference than switching to grass-fed beef.
yeah, I think that's, and then I guess there's some data out there. Well, I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, the grain finished meat is a little higher in monounsaturated fats than grass finished, and some people argue monounsaturated fats may be better. Again, that's all great debatable stuff. And I know this is a topic that makes people uncomfortable when when everything just doesn't match up perfectly. Because it's a beautiful story. I mean, I love the fact that we're regenerating the land with cattle and sheep, and those stories are out there, and I think we should continue to do that. But people want to make it all like this is all perfect and there's no other way to go. But at the same time, we just have to go with what the actual facts are. And I hope in the carnivore community, as opposed to like a vegan community where it's all ideology and anything that goes against the ideology is dismissed as evil and wrong, or this is just, what happens to humans when they get healthier. What, what was the most surprising thing you discovered when you did this? Now, here's a criticism. And I've talked to guys like Stephen Swick, who's pretty knowledgeable about some of this stuff. I'm not sure if you know who he is, but he writes really nice. He used to write the LA Chefs College, and he now calls it regenerative veganism. But he's, talked about the fact that the pushback that the people that say that, well, regenerative agriculture is not scalable, it's not sustainable, we can't do it on large parts of the population. And those studies have largely been based on assumptions that grass-finished beef, is just the same way that everybody does it. They don't necessarily pasture them a certain way. What, having talked to, I'm sure, producers that actually produce meat in that fashion, what is your thought on scalability?
Yeah, that's a huge one. And I actually know that guy really well that you were mentioning, Stephen. So there's a couple things. One is that, if you look at a farm like Polyface, he's producing 4 times the county average in beef, and he's stacking enterprises. So he's not just beef that's on this pastures. Then he's got the chickens, and then he's got the pigs, and then he's got the bunnies, and so he's not only making meat on these pastures, he's making all these other foods as well, and producing much more, healthy soil, healthy pastures, so that, the next year it's even better. So that's one, is that, they'll take these numbers out of rangelands, like in, badlands in Nebraska or something, and they'll say, well, that there it would take 5 acres per cow or 10 acres per cow, and they'll extrapolate that out to the entire country, and that's not accurate. The other thing too is that I visited ranches that are doing regenerative grazing and then sending their cattle to feedlots, and I think we have to look at that. We can't just make this about grass-fed is good, feedlot is bad, because there's some really great calf cow producers and stockers who are grazing in really good ways, and then it's just more economical for them to send their cattle to a feedlot to be finished. In fact, the ranchers that I was with in Mexico do that. So they're regenerating, this network of ranchers are regenerating 1 million acres of desert in Chihuahua, Mexico, land that used to be grasslands and is now just desert, nothing desert, but it wasn't always like that. They're turning it back into what looks like the Serengeti, just with cattle, which is amazing. What we left out of the film is that they're also then sending them to feedlots to be fattened. And that's just because economically for him, it just makes more sense that way, because he doesn't have that forage to really fatten them to make it profitable for himself. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that cattle that are finished on feedlots are actually upcycling nutrients, left over from the ethanol industry and other, the alcohol industry. They're upcycling that into nutrient dense protein. So I don't think it's like grass finished or nothing. I think there's a lot of in between, and we can't be alienating those other ranchers. So yes, this can totally be done at scale. I go through the numbers in my book with Rob, and I've had many experts look over those numbers. There's a lot of underutilized land. There's a lot of unutilized land. There's a CRP land, a conservation land that the government owns that currently can't be ranched right now for no reason. So if we had good ranching practices and, really beefed up our production and grazed that land, not in a continuous way, but in a regenerative way, we could be grass finishing all the cattle in the US.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing that we have what, 750,000 ranches on the U.S. Most of them are 40, 50 head of cattle, and if you could get the majority of them to pasture, in a way that restores the land, it would be tremendous. I mean, the impact would be huge. Even if you get half of those guys to do that, the impact would be enormous. And there's people that are talking about, what happens to an animal that goes to a feedlot. Are those animals all getting sick? Is it bad for the animals? Does it depend on the feedlot? What's the deal on that? Or do you address that at all?
So in the film, I don't, because there just wasn't enough time. I have an hour and 20 minutes to explain that, meat is nutritious. It can be an ethically good decision to eat meat. It can be done at scale. The water arguments are wrong. The methane arguments are wrong. So I had a lot to cover, and I also had to make this entertaining. So I didn't get into a ton of nuance with feedlots and everything, although I do in the book. But not everyone's going to pick up this big, heavy book. So I kind of had to make some decisions there. Wait, what was your question again? Remind me what you asked.
Do cattle in feedlots universally,
Oh,
are they
yeah.
universally sick? Is that
No, not necessarily. I've been to some feedlots that are gorgeous. They don't smell bad. The cows are, all under shade. And, I think it really just depends on the feedlot. And I think that unfortunately the meat industry has not been super transparent, and they could be doing better with their PR for sure. But I also think that, finishing cattle to fatten them up on some grain is, makes for some really tasty steaks, and is really an efficient process, and is a much better way of producing protein than CAFO chicken or CAFO pork. I mean, what really makes me crazy is people saying, well, just switch to chicken, which is less nutrient dense. You're more likely to get salmonella than sick from some kind of pathogen from chicken than from beef. And those animals are 100% indoors eating only grain their whole lives. I think nutritionally, ethically, and environmentally, typical cattle are a much better choice than chicken or pork from, the traditional system.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, like I said, I'm not a chicken farmer or chicken, whatever, chicken ranch or chicken ear or whatever you call it when you raise chickens. But I eat almost no chicken at all, just because I prefer beef, and that's the way it's been. But I mean, I see even the ranchers out there saying they don't want to see the chickenization of beef. And there's good ways you can go. You can certainly make the feedlot system worse than it is. In the name of efficiency. And I see there's some folks that are putting in 6-month-old animals to feedlots, which is earlier than they used to be. Yearlings and things like that. And so obviously this is a very sensitive subject for some people, everybody, because we hear this ubiquitous factory farm term thrown about without real clarification on what that actually means. And, I mean, it's like anything that's not grass finished regenerative factory farm. And it's always frustrating because you have people that are they've kind of been sort of bought into this belief system that everybody that gives a cow a piece of corn is a bad, evil person, and it's evil for the cows. And that doesn't necessarily,
Yeah.
in cases.
And I think those of us who come at this from a medical background, from a public health interest background, we're looking at the nutrient density in beef and kind of weighing that against a diet heavy in processed foods. And it's like, well, what's more ethical, to tell people, to eat from the middle of the grocery store and get diabetes? And I actually looked at the carbon footprint of diabetes in my book, because, when you look at all the Lancets and the hospitalization, the time out of work, amputations, all the plastic involved in an amputation, as you know, I mean, the carbon footprint of diabetes is pretty bad. And so I think we have to look at all those ramifications, when we're talking about, what do we do with people that don't have access to, perfect grass-fed unicorn meat,
Yeah, and this is some point that I've been making. It's one of the things that the sort of the plant-based, the vegan advocates are very good at framing the argument with the outcomes they choose to utilize. And one of the things is like calories per environmental resource use, and it's not just about calories; it's about actual nutrition. I know Don Layman's done a nice study on that. When I talk about greenhouse gases, when we realize it. Cattle are 2% according to the EPA here in the U.S. and the healthcare industry is 10%. And like I said, if you're no longer sick and not contributing to that 10% sector, arguably you're creating less environmental impact. Do you guys? Because I think it's about framing. How you frame the argument. And we've been letting people with the big loudmouth megaphone. The plant-based people frame the argument any way they choose to. And I think that's a very important way to say, look, we can study other metrics, and I think healthy people, or I should say, unhealthy people are not particularly environmentally sustainable, as you just sort of pointed out.
Another thing we brought up too, and this is really important, but touching on the social justice sort of virtue signaling. When we're looking at developing countries where they don't have doctors for hundreds of miles, let alone a CVS where they can go get their B12 supplements. They have to get their nutrients from their food, and they rely on animals for that because their land is usually really bad and they can't crop it. There's a lot of places where women can't own land, but they can own livestock. We know when women are better fed, that their kids have a better chance in life. And so I actually argue in the book and the film that pushing a vegan agenda on people who don't have the privilege to push meat away is actually a form of privilege and unethical.
Do you, I mean, because obviously this is a kind of a, we talk about environmental impacts and health. This is more than just a United States, Western European issue, Australian issue. I mean, there are, 7+ billion people on the planet. Many of them live in poverty. Many of them depend upon, animals for their subsistence and survival. And so how do we approach the worldwide issue? Do you talk about that much in the
I
movie?
do, yeah. I've got some footage from Rwanda in my film. And like I said, in Mexico too. It was really important to me to bring in multiple voices. We have a farmer from England. We have a butcher from Belgium. So we really tried to make this feel like an international film, and especially the footage from Rwanda. There's just no arguing that these folks have to get their nutrients from meat and milk. And we know that when kids get more meat and milk, there's less stunting, there's more intellectual, development, and their GDP is higher. So, it's important for global security to make sure that folks are well nourished everywhere.
There's oh, what was I going to say here? There's a um, you know we see that the majority of the people that are on plant-based diets on the planet are not doing it by choice. They're forced to, and we like
Yeah.
you don't see the stunting. Well, I mean, you see the tremendous stunting and nutrient deficiencies when meat is absent the diet, and we can look to, obviously populations where meat is even indigenous populations or subsistence populations where they survive on meat. These northern populations, and they don't have the same issues that people that exclude meat and milk from the diet.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in India, what we're seeing right now are people getting stoned to death because of even having rumored to have meat in their house. This is a way that the Hindu nationalist government is cleansing Muslims. It's a real huge problem. We go into that in the book. And even, the Nazis used vegetarianism as a way of virtue signaling, as a way to elevate Hitler to beyond just a political figure, to be more of a spiritual leader. And so he used, the way kosher slaughtering and, positioning Jews as dirty meat eaters as a way to, have sort of unquestionable authority over Germany. So again, that's all stuff we go into in the book. That's not really, we didn't have time for that in the film, but there's some really crazy stuff happening. And, we talk a lot also in the book about this idea of food sovereignty, right? So let people eat their traditional diet and leave them alone. I think globalism has been a huge problem. I think, I'm a huge advocate for regional food systems and for, just letting other people figure it out and not imposing our ideals on other cultures.
I don't know if you get, well, there's two things. One is, as I understand it, here in the US and, Europe and Australia, Brazil, other places, they're very, very efficient at raising beef and getting more efficient. But most of the world still has, I mean, they're 200, 300 years behind and they lose a lot of efficiency. I know like in India, they've got 200 million cattle roaming around the streets eating garbage, and
Yeah.
they're very, they're sickly animals, or they're full of parasites. Um, is that something that you think, if you could, bring up the rest of the world, even with better breeding practices, nutrition practices, health practices, the animal, it would make a huge impact on
Yeah.
meat ability.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. On our farm, we work a lot with this lab, this engineering lab at MIT called D Lab, and they make inventions for developing countries, and we've been testing for them this cultivating motorcycle. So you can drive this motorcycle up and down the rows, and it weeds the fields. And the idea is that it's so expensive for these farmers to be using cows for their labor, because once the cow is done with its productivity, it's expected that the farmer feeds that cow forever. Like this cow, they can't eat it. They have to just, keep it alive. And it's a huge burden on these small farmers, not only in India, but in other places too. And so we're trying to help them with these motorcycles in using those instead of cattle as labor. So the India issue, I mean, vegetarian India is only possible because of Muslims who eat meat, because what are you going to do with all those male cows from the dairy industry? So that's something that a lot of people don't acknowledge. But yeah, there's definitely, I mean, there's breed issues, and there's also, I mean, America's really fertile, and there's a lot of places throughout the world that aren't as fertile as America. And so they're not going to have that same efficiency that we have. We have a great transportation network. We have, highly efficient everything, but, when we're looking at like, where's the rest of the cropland, like for the idea that we're just going to use up all our cropland and just feed the world on plants. There's a lot of places where even if it's cropland, it's not prime cropland. Like in the Congo, they can really only grow cassava, but they don't have the ability to process that cassava into flour. And so it all just rots. Or, in a lot of other places too, where they don't have good infrastructure, one storm will wipe out the whole crop forever. It's a highly volatile business getting into farming, and that will destroy your whole livelihood for the rest of your life if you lose 1 year of one good crop. So livestock just isn't as risky as cropping can be for so many people in developing countries, where, getting the capital to buy all those seeds and, renting the land and all that is, really expensive and dangerous.
Yeah, one last thing, as we see this sort of big push for plant-based, do you think that is organic, people directed, that just the people, everybody wants to save the planet, or is there some financial motivation behind a plant-based narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's Beyond Burger and, a lot of these companies that have a lot of money to be made. Look, the money's in the processing of the food. It's not in the raw material. So these ranchers aren't making a ton of money. Who's making money is the people that can take that raw food product and transform it into something else. So Beyond Burger is twice as expensive as organic grass-fed beef per pound, but they sell it in half-pound packages. So, if you're looking at Beyond Burger versus beef, Beyond Burger looks like a good deal because it's actually half as much, even though the package looks as large as a pound of beef. And, it's really convenient for them. They're funding Meatless Mondays. They've got this whole, they've got all their followers. I mean, it's really smart of them. And it's real, it was really hard for us to find a celebrity that would be okay with promoting meat for our narrator. It's just not okay. It's not politically correct to be eating meat. And I think, we've got to, hopefully this pandemic, like on the other side, it seems to me like there's a lot more interest in eating real food and homesteading and victory gardens and things like that. And, all those images that we saw of, everyone leaving the Beyond Burger on the shelf and buying all the real meat, hopefully people will. I know Beyond Burger stock was actually downgraded by Goldman Sachs. So I think that, I'm hoping that there'll be a real like renaissance return to real food and meat as part of that.
Yeah, that's hopefully the case. Somebody just asked who the narrator was. If you're, I don't know if you're able.
I can't say yet.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Unfortunately, we're about out of time. I've got to go do another podcast here.
Okay.
And it's a pleasure. Can you let people know how to support what you're doing, where to find you, those types of things real quick, how to support the film, the book?
Yep. Sacredcow.info. And we've got some pre-order bonuses if folks want to pre-order the book. There'll be one coming in the mail for you, Sean. We've got some shirts and stuff up there. And then we also have info on, they can see a clip from the film and learn how to donate to the film. It's a nonprofit. So folks can do that too.
Well, thank you so much for doing it. This is well overdue, and it sounds like it's going to be a wonderful production, and hopefully we'll add more to the discussion and maybe change some people's minds. I think we desperately need to do that. So anyway, guys, thanks so much. I'm going to, like I said, I've got to go do an HBO podcast with my buddy Zach here. You guys, I'll put one thing in here for the people who don't know. The Harvard study is live. It is linked in a number of places. For 6 months or more carnivore, I would encourage you to check it out, participate if you can. This is another thing besides Diana's movie showing that meat can be part of a health, including meat for some of us, meat. But anyway, guys, thank you so much, and good luck to you, and I look forward to seeing you again once the crazy coronavirus stuff is.
I know.
See you at a meeting or something. Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye. See you guys tomorrow.